Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I'll review today is Gulliver's Travels. Before we continue, this is personalized limited edition of Gulliver's Travels with leather cover designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself, if you are interested. Now let's get back to the review. Gulliver's Travels, or full title, travels into several remote nations of the world in 4 parts by Lemuel Gulliver, first a surgeon and then a captain of several ships. In the old days, the titles gave you a pretty clear idea what the book was about. Anyway, Gulliver Travels is an adventure tale and a satire about human nature, written by Jonathan Swift and published in 1726. Swift was an Irish and English writer born in Dublin, but both of his parents moved there from England. He came from a well-off family and received a pretty good education, graduating from the Dublin's Trinity College, which is somewhat of Irish Oxford, and it graduated quite a few famous Irishmen, including Oscar Wilde and Dracula's Bram Stoker. Swift wrote many essays, pamphlets, and poems, and was active in the early 18th century politics, and Gulliver Travels was probably influenced by his political interests, somewhat satirical nature, and also being exposed to the ideas of the Enlightenment, which were becoming popular in the late 17th and early 18th centuries. What is Gulliver's Travels about? It is a satirical look at ourselves, the Western society, while seeing and experiencing other civilizations and being exposed to their behavior, which sometimes functions as a mirror reflection of ourselves, and also we are presented with their opinions about us, how others see us as a society, and often the picture is not very flattering. I cannot but conclude that the bulk of your natives to be the most pernicious race of little, odious vermin that nature ever suffered to crawl upon the surface of the earth. A bit of the plot. The book begins with some biographical information about the protagonist, Lemuel Gulliver. He attends Cambridge, studies naval subjects, and becomes ship surgeon, travels the world, learns languages, and continues his studies, later gets married and sets up a medical practice, all of it probably to show he was a man of enlightenment, everything but ignorant. My hours of leisure I spend in reading the best authors, ancient and modern, being always provided with a good number of books, and when I was ashore, in observing the manners and dispositions of the people, as well as learning their language, wherein I had a great facility by the strength of my memory. But life on land isn't what he expected, so he decides to return to the naval service, and on his first voyage he is shipwrecked on the island of Lilliput, which is somewhat of our world in miniature. The inhabitants are 6 inches tall, so Gulliver is a giant among them and enjoys the power this brings. But eventually, because of the common human traits such as envy, he has to leave. In the second voyage, Gulliver travels to Brobdingnag, where the inhabitants are giants, and he, the little guy, Lilliput, so there, being somewhat useless and invisible, all he can do is observe, and it allows him to see how unjust society can be to the individual. In the third voyage, Gulliver finds himself on a floating island called Lepata, where inhabitants are so focused on immediate tasks that they cannot see the broad consequences of their actions. He also visits neighboring lands where he encounters various strange customs and practices. In the fourth and final voyage, Gulliver lands on an island inhabited by intelligent horse-like beings called Haichnimchnems and savage humanoid creatures called Yahoos. The Haichnimchnems are presented as intelligent, kind, and rational, while the Yahoos are primitive savages, impulsive and cruel. and this gives Gulliver a look into and makes him realize the general ugliness of humanity, and that's the basic plot. What are my thoughts about Gulliver's Travels? It is a serious book disguised as a children's adventure tale. At least that's what it has been converted into. That's the nature of satire. It's misunderstood by most, but a few people who read it carefully can see the depth of its arguments. George Orwell, who wrote 1984, said he read Gulliver's Travels many times and would put it on any list of the most important books to read. Gulliver's Travels has been written in the age of discovery, colonialism, and slavery, but also the age of enlightenment, the beginning of the critical look at ourselves as the Western society and human beings. Through Gulliver's adventures and experiences, Swift gives us a satirical view into the politics, religion, and culture of his times. Differences in opinions has cost many millions of lives. For instance, whether flesh be bread or bread be flesh, whether the juice of a certain berry be blood or wine. Swift probably is referring to the religious conflicts in Europe during the 16th and 17th century and its culmination, the 30-Year War, one of the most destructive conflicts in the European history. Many of Swift's observations are relevant today since they refer to the basics of human nature and they impact the contemporary society in the similar ways. Because the foundation of the human behavior doesn't really change, just the superficialities. The four voyages give Gulliver a different experience, but are related to his homeland and teach him everything is relative. Undoubtedly, philosophers are in the right when they tell us that nothing is great or little otherwise than by comparison. In Lilliput, Gulliver gets a broad view as an outside observer, looking from above, comparable to God. He sees a general working of a society. Seemingly, he has a lot of power, physical, to influence and change the trajectory of that culture, but it doesn't seem enough to make any long-lasting adjustments, maybe because he misses the small details of the workings of Lilliput society, which operates in the similar fashion to our Western society. Hypocrisy is one of the common traits. When hearing about how akin their behavior is to the Gulliver's people, the Lilliputs don't believe it, make excuses, and consider themselves different, better, which again makes them similar to ourselves, by avoiding looking into the mirror or not recognizing their own reflection in it. In Brobdingnag, the land of the giants, Gulliver seems to be seeing things as through the magnifying glass and has no physical powers to make any impact. He is insignificant, but can see small details, usually not noticeable in everyday life. He sees details of the human body, the flesh, and it is not very pretty. Also, he can smell the exponentially stronger odor of the Brobdingnag's bodies and realizes how the Lilliputians saw and smelled him. So perhaps the lesson is that getting a closer look can be shocking and disappointing, but on the other hand, the close-up can make us see how the things really are and give us a better perspective on the problems we are facing. The story might have been inspired by the invention of the microscope and the growth of the scientific research during the Age of Enlightenment. For the first time, we were able to see physical details about ourselves and our immediate environment. In Lepata, the problem is too much focus on details, doing specifics, which makes the individuals oblivious to the long-term general consequences on the society, and they squander the opportunity to better the lives of everybody. While Brobdingnag was more about the physical aspect of focus, the Lepata deals more with the intangible, abstract, and the consequences of focusing on specific actions and neglecting other necessities. It is about limited vision, since the only things Lepatans are interested in are the mathematics and music, and they describe everything in the terms related to their interest. In general, Gulliver finds them not that different from some Europeans, specifically the women. The caprices of womankind are not limited by any climate or nation, and that they are much more uniform than can be easily imagined. Also, the king of the Lepatans lives on a floating island, and Swift describes its mechanics and technology with some pretty advanced ideas for those times. It seemed to me a bit like a UFO. Perhaps there were already sightings of them, and it was the inspiration for Lepata. Gulliver also travels around and is exposed to more pretty advanced scientific ideas and knowledge the people in that part of the world have. The world of which Lepata is part seems to be an island continent somewhere in the Pacific. It seems kind of a Pacific Atlantis. On one of the islands, Gulliver meets historical figures such as Alexander the Great, Aristotle, and Julius Caesar, and they correct the ideas he learned from reading books about them, wrong assumptions and wrong interpretations, and it makes him realize how twisted and manipulated writings about history are. On another island, he learns some inhabitants are immortal, but they are looked down on. Probably Swift is trying to show that infinite life has no value and cannot be appreciated. Gulliver's time in the land of Houyhnhnms, intelligent and talking horses, gives him an outside view into the general ugliness of the humanity, the naked and primitive creature, when you deprive it of all the superficial masks it has created to hide its ugly side, seeing ourselves from the outside as others might see us. Their heads and breasts were covered with a thick hair, some frizzled and other lank. They had beards like goats and a long ridge of hair down their backs and the foreparts of their legs and feet, but the rest of their bodies were bare, so that I might see their skins, which were of a brown buff color. They had no tails, nor any hair at all on their buttocks, except about the anus, which I presume nature had placed there to defend them as they sat on the ground. For this posture they used, as well as lying down, and often stood on their hind feet. They climbed high trees as nimbly as squirrel, for they had strong extended claws before and behind, terminating in sharp points and hooked. The horses are surprised at the clothing Gulliver is wearing and wonder why would humans want to cover what nature gave them. Usually we hide what we don't want others to see, our bodies behind our clothes and our ugly nature behind superficial pleasantries. Gulliver describes to the horses the European civilization, the greed for possessions and power, which is never satisfied, and how the humans treat each other and animals, and the horses come to the conclusion that humans are even more perverse than the Yahoos, the humanoid creatures they have to deal with. Gulliver also observes the Yahoos, their actions and reactions, and this makes him even more aware of the depravity of his own human race. His biggest realization of how similar he is to the Yahoos comes when he noticed that the Yahoo females feel a natural attraction to him. Swift might also be making an argument for the improvement of eating habits, somewhat of an endorsement for the vegetarian lifestyle. The horses, Houyhnhnms, eat a healthy vegan diet, and the Yahoos are scavengers, eating dead flesh they find, which might be implied as the reason and consequence of their degeneration. Gulliver decides to eat the horse diet, adapted to his human digestion, and says while he ate it he never had any problems, was never sick, and felt great. Swift lived in the initial stages of the Age of Enlightenment, also called the Age of Reason, and the book's plot includes many of its ideas. We took a critical look at ourselves and what we as the society were doing to the individuals and other cultures we came into contact with, and issues such as human rights and equality appeared. and it created the debate in the society, especially between the intellectuals. It was the first time we looked into a mirror and tried to see ourselves in a more objective light, what consequences our actions were having. This has been an ongoing process which continues today. There was also surging interest in sciences and nature. How did it relate to us, and what place in the universe do we occupy? While in Lilliput, Gulliver observes how nature has evolved and adapted everything to the Lilliputian size, the plants and animals, or more probably, the Lilliputians were adapted to the conditions already existing on their island. Also, how we adapt our beliefs and traditions to the prevailing conditions in our surroundings. They bury their dead with their heads directly downwards, because they hold an opinion that in 11,000 moons they are all to rise again, in which period the earth, which they conceive to be flat, will turn upside down, and by this means they shall at their resurrection be found ready standing on their feet. The learned among them confess the absurdity of this doctrine, but the practice still continues in compliance to the vulgar. Many of the beliefs surge as the result of our limited knowledge, ignorance, and start to look ridiculous as awareness increases. But not to everybody. There are always people to whom what they believe is superior to the facts, and this allows people on the top to keep the majority on the bottom under control. Some of the ideas put into practice in the Lilliput seem pretty utopian and not that different from what the modern progressives are proposing. Maybe Swift wanted to show that ideas of the Enlightenment are practical and workable, but today we know that some of them are not. Gulliver's Travels might also be a metaphor for the clash of cultures. Besides the age of enlightenment, it was also the age of discovery, and the Europeans were coming into contact with many different people and cultures. The experience in Lilliput is similar to how some more primitive cultures saw the Europeans as giants initially able to do some good with their power and inventions, but in the long run a negative force, overburdened on their resources and destructive to their traditions and way of life, by trying to force their own rules on the natives. Our philosophers are in much doubt and would rather conjecture that you drop from the moon or one of the stars, because it is certain that 100 mortals of your bulk would in a short time destroy all the fruits and cattle of His Majesty's dominions. Some cultures had their own great achievements, but could not compete with the Europeans. Probably an example could be the native population of the Americas. The Brobdingnag giants might represent cultures that considered themselves superior to the Europeans and didn't see them as a threat, but rather curiosity and entertainment. An example could be Chinese Empire. And Lepata might represent people who are not interested in the contact with the Europeans because they kind of enjoyed their isolated way of life, to focus on themselves and couldn't see anything useful the Europeans had to offer. Probably similar to the Japanese. Of course, they all underestimated the ambition, tenacity, and greed of the Europeans, and paid for it in the long run. The destructive qualities of the Europeans were kind of presented or summed up metamorphically in the Gulliver's time in The Land of the Horses, the fourth voyage. To sum it up, Gulliver's Travels is an Age of Enlightenment book, so it has to be read from that perspective. But at the same time, the basics of humanity don't change, so the work, its ideas are somewhat timeless. The novel offers a unique perspective on human nature, power and greed, and how it affects individuals and societies. Seems as each part progressively dives deeper into the human nature until you get to the basics or the bottom, and the picture is not very pleasing. Further, Swift is trying to show that everything is relative, literally. In one place you are the biggest person, and in the other the smallest. In one place you are a scary giant, and in the other a toy to play with. I found the reading to be similar or maybe even inspiration for Voltaire's Candide. It also might be somewhat of a rebuttal to Robinson Crusoe, published a few years before, where Robinson Crusoe is a more of a positive look at human spirit and capabilities and the general achievements of the individual as the part of the Western society. And Gulliver's Travels is more of a criticism of the human nature which created the Western civilization. It is reflection on nature and evolution, and the conclusion that might be drawn could be that any creature, with the help of nature, can evolve and become dominant. So the humans might not be so special. And also that power corrupts. Okay, let's talk about the physical book. The book I am holding is a paperback, which I transform into a hardcover, leather-bound edition. To make the cover, I use grade A, naturally tan hide I buy from a tannery in North Spain. It is the same leather Louis Vuitton uses to make his bags, so it is top quality. I do all the processing of the leather myself. First I designed the cover, and for this I used the illustration of Gulliver in Lilliput. This is the back with the blurb, and inside front cover I printed a quote from the book. If you want to see a more detailed video where I explain how I transform paperback into leather-bound hardcover, click on the link in the description. I will make a maximum of 100 editions of each title. Each one will be numbered and initialed, and the number will go in chronological order from 2 up, since number 1 stays with me. The price will be around $100, so if you would like me to make one for you, you can click below on my email and send me a message. I do not guarantee I will do it, since it will depend on the time I have available, access to leather, and if I can get my hands on the copy of the book. Now, if you're not willing to spend the $100 but you still want the book, what you can do is click below on the PayPal link and donate $3 or more to my channel, and for every 100 donations I will make a lottery and draw one name, and the winner will receive the book. So if you are cheap but feel lucky, this might be the way to do it. Also, your donations give me the extra motivation to make the book reviews, and I appreciate them very much, so thank you in advance. One more thing, when you make your donation, remember to include the title of the book you would like to win. The book itself is beautiful. Visually, it has a nice texture, it smells great, and the more you handle it, the more beautiful it will become. And it makes a great gift for yourself or somebody who appreciates books. So if you want one, don't snooze or you might lose. Well, that's it, so let's end it here, and until next time, keep your ear close to the ground and read a book. Adios.